Welcome to Green and Red, scrappy politics for scrappy people. A regular podcast on radical, environmental and anti-capitalist politics. Brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
To the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Parkin, in Berkeley, California. And as always, I am joined by
Bob Bazanko. I'm in Houston, Texas.
And today we're joined by another Texan. We're joined by Candice Bernd, who comes back from time to talk to us about Texas politics and sometimes other things. Candice is a senior editor and staff reporter at Truthout, whose work has appeared in The Nation, in These Times, The Texas Observer, Salon, Yes Magazine, Earth Island Journal, many others. We're going to talk about her latest article, which is around the case of Daniel Perry, who is a right-winger who shot and killed Garrett Foster in July of 2020 at a Black Lives Matter protest, which is a story we actually covered at the time. We talked with Austin activist Deb Russell at the time, and Perry. He was recently convicted of murder of Garrett Foster, and then Governor Greg Abbott immediately responded to the news saying that he was going to expedite a pardon request on Perry's behalf. And so we're going to talk about this a bit with Candice. This has all happened over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I believe. And you know, the latest news part of the story has appeared in Candice's article in Truthout, which has also been reprinted in the Texas Observer. But Candice, why don't you tell us a little bit? I know that you've done an interview with the district attorney of Travis County, DA Garza. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit of the news, the update from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the latest thing was, I think it was on April 11th, DA Garza had sent this letter and shared it publicly that he was requesting to present to the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, evidence in the case against Perry before they make their determination. So that is to say that Greg Abbott cannot sort of just unilaterally do this pardon. He has to have the pardon request approved by the Parole Board, basically. And so it's 7 members who are all appointed by Abbott. And he requested that be expedited before Perry has even been sentenced, which is unprecedented. And so Garza sent this letter requesting, to do a presentation before the board about evidence in the case. And then he also requested that the board hear from Foster's family before they make that determination. And the latest that I was able to provide the update is that the board has agreed to that. I got an internal email from the office basically just showing that Garza was in communication with the Parole Board's general counsel, and they worked out an agreement and a timeline around when this presentation will be happening. And it looks like it would likely be happening after sentencing, which kind of signals that the board is willing to let this legal process play out first, and are less inclined to sort of expedite this before sentencing. So that's an important distinction. I think, with the politics of the Parole Board, it's significant because the Parole Board has been very politicized by Abbott in the past. Of course, the Parole Board had rejected this recommendation for a pardon in George Floyd's case, right, for his 2004 drug conviction. And because of the heated primary where Abbott faced these far-right challengers who were bringing this up, the Parole Board kind of reneged on that. So this is an interesting sort of turnabout for the board and an interesting signal moving forward.
Do you get the sense that Abbott is looking for a way out of this if you want to mention a little bit about the revelations that came out too, because obviously it kind of blows up, the whole case, the rationale for a pardon.
Yeah, so I think that Abbott, I think that even if the board is turning around here, that it actually could be good for Abbott. He has definitely changed his tone on this since the evidence was unsealed. Basically, Perry's texts and social media posts were unsealed. These texts are egregious. You can't even begin to make some of this stuff up. It's literally everything you could think of possibly being evil about a person all rolled into one 82-page document. It's hard to even exaggerate, but basically just all the racist messages in the world. I don't even know if I should repeat many of them. I mean, just really egregious racist memes, anti-Muslim memes. But what's significant about the racist stuff is that there are texts in there that show, and social media posts in there that show that Perry was premeditating ideas about killing protesters and claiming self-defense. And that's specifically in the text messages talking about, you know, I'm gonna go to Dallas and shoot some protesters, or like, when I'm in Dallas, no protesters better come near my car. So these were thoughts that had already gone into Perry's head before. So this was something that he had premeditated. He had premeditated ideas about doing the very thing that he ended up doing. And then the other key pieces are that he's a sexual predator. He had this inappropriate exchange with a 16-year-old, basically saying, you know, he kind of warned her, don't send me any nudes, so that, you know, he's protecting himself legally there, but he also sends a message saying, like, I'm going to go to bed, come up with a reason why I should be your boyfriend before I wake up. This is a 16-year-old. So that, you know, is complicated for Abbott, because Abbott has gone all in on this anti-groomer rhetoric, which is of course directed at trans people and drag queens. This whole fever pitch the right has had around, you know, protecting children supposedly, and this anti-groomer stuff. And now it comes out that, well, what do you know? Daniel Perry is a groomer. So definitely, I think the politics of that have been complicating everything since that got unsealed. And so basically what we know is that Abbott has kind of released this blanket statement saying, like, all evidence is for the parole board to consider. So I actually think that, you know, Abbott might be hoping at this point that the parole board does decide against this pardon so that he can use that as an excuse to get out of it. So I think that that's definitely a possibility. So basically, we have sentencing. The next hearing in the case is on May 3rd. The Perry's attorneys have asked for a new trial. So during that hearing, the judge is going to determine whether or not to give them a new trial. They are arguing that evidence has been withheld. And so I think that the judge unsealing Perry's texts and social media posts is kind of a signal that he's not going to grant a new trial, because if he did, he basically just tainted the jury, you know, the next jury with that. So I think it's pretty likely, you can bet that he's not going to get a new trial. And so if that's what does indeed occur on May 3rd, sentencing will be scheduled. And then after sentencing, it's going to go before the parole board, where Garza is going to be defending the conviction, and we will see what moves forward from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, the parole board's always done Abbott's work, so I would assume that's kind of the point. I think they'll kind of get him out of this. You know, they'll kind of take responsibility, and he's off the hook. And Tucker Carlson's gone, so we can't give him a hard time about it. So.
Yeah, that's another interesting part of this. Like, every part of it is backfiring, I think, on Abbott, because it was Tucker who put out the call for this pardon in the first place, right? And Abbott delivered on that within hours. I mean, he did less than a day after this conviction. And of course, Kyle Rittenhouse also called for the pardon. So that was another figure that he's responding to. And so you have everybody on the right now comparing Daniel Perry to Kyle Rittenhouse.
Who's in Texas now too? Rittenhouse isn't down in Brent, I hear.
Oh, I was not aware of that, but
there have been rumors, though, he's going to go to Texas A&M, but A&M, every time that comes out, A&M says no, he's not. So
I did hear that. Yeah, I did hear that.
Yeah. I'd read he was trying to go to Blinn, which is a feeder school, into A&M before, so he could try and get in.
Yeah.
But anyway.
When A&M doesn't want you, it's bad.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, this comparison, it's just, I mean, the whole thing, like the idea that this was self-defense in any way is just being shown to be, publicly sort of being destroyed, especially by this evidence with the premeditated texts and stuff. But, I spoke to an activist who's really, really close, who got really close to Whitney Mitchell, who is the surviving wife of Garrett Foster, about everything that happened that night. And I should say that I actually was present for the first portion of the protest on the night that Garrett Foster died, except for I left early. There was protests almost every night that summer. And so I was a frequent attendee of the protests. And that was just a night where, we had gone to the Capitol and they were hosting speeches. And I just decided that night that I was gonna turn in from that point. And then of course, after everything, I woke up the next morning and heard about everything that was happening. So just wild stuff to think about that. But basically this activist I spoke to, Danny Reichman, was really close to both Foster and Mitchell, and basically worked with the two to do mutual aid in Austin, helping Austin's unhoused community. There's an area where the unhoused community gathers under the I-35 bridge, kind of right in front of APD's headquarters on 8th Street. So during the summer, that was the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020. A lot of activists were in front of APD headquarters almost every night, every day, every night. That's where everybody was. There's actually like fencing now in front of APD headquarters because of everything that transpired. But yeah, that was a frequent presence. And so while the protests were in that area, a lot of activists started doing mutual aid for the unhoused community that was right there in that area. And basically, Danny Reichman worked with both Foster and Mitchell to help sort of do that work, and came to know them really well. And basically, Danny told me that, the only reason Foster even got in front of that car, approached Perry's car at all, was because Perry pulled right up in front of Whitney, who is a quadruple amputee in a wheelchair, and Garrett was very protective of his wife. They were common law married. I refer to them as wife and husband in the story. Technically, they were fiancés. They were planning on getting married, but they were also together forever in common law. And I just wanted to bestow that sort of onto them because I think that's appropriate. But yeah, so basically Danny is saying that the only reason, he even approached that car was to put himself in between Perry's car and Whitney, to protect Whitney. And that totally tracks if you understand them, because Garrett was everything for Whitney. He was her caretaker, everything, he lived and breathed Whitney. And they were there almost every day during that summer. They were there. And so I think that that's important to underscore. And then the other major thing that came out of my talking to Danny about everything is that, she talks about, and apparently this didn't make it into the trial at all, but Garrett couldn't have, she's saying that Garrett could not have raised his rifle, that AK, to point it at Perry because of his shoulder strap. Like his shoulder strap, she said, was so tight that he was unable to actually raise it out of the low ready position to aim it, and that he would have had to have taken the entire strap off in order to aim the gun. And that he had mentioned that and told her that, and said he had ordered a new strap, but that it hadn't come in yet. So that's this like important key detail, that he couldn't have aimed it. And of course the gun was recovered with no bullet in the chamber. So, and that all tracks with everything too, because Danny is saying that it was meant to be a deterrent. Like he was just carrying that gun as a way to deter folks.
And Perry, oh, go ahead. I think you're going to say what I was going to say.
Yeah, and Perry was actually trying to drive through the crowd, correct?
Oh,
when
yeah.
all this occurred.
Yeah, he ran a red light specifically to drive into the crowd of protesters. That is why this jury unanimously convicted him, because you can't claim self-defense when you started the fight. And that's clearly what this case shows. Like, he did this on purpose. And what Danny and other witnesses who were there that night talk about is the way the car came through so fast. Like, Danny is saying, like, she was basically telling me, like, it came through so fast that I thought for sure somebody got hit. Like, she was like, oh, when she saw people gathering around the car, she was like, oh, good, thank goodness, because somebody has to get, this person's license plate, because they surely hit somebody. So that's what was going through her mind before the gunshots rang out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just wild.
Didn't Perry though also say, like, in one of the texts, he even said, like, the guy didn't raise his gun. I got to before he could raise his gun. So I think he even conceded that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Kind of
So
idea that.
Right. So that's why, again, like, it was a unanimous conviction. Like, the evidence is all there. It's all completely there. It was weighed in this trial. He said specifically that he didn't want to give Foster the chance to raise the gun at him. Right. So based on all of this, it's very clear that Foster never pointed that weapon. Couldn't physically have pointed that weapon, and wasn't approaching his car to point a weapon. He was protecting his wife. You know what I mean? So that's what's wild. And in my story, I really wanted to center Whitney. Whitney doesn't really do interviews, which is for good reason, because she's gone through so much trauma with this whole thing, right? But
and she's harassed quite a bit too.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying is she's gone, ever since it happened, she's faced this onslaught of ableist, sexist, racist harassment from people, on the right, who have all these ideas about who Garrett was, or, the narrative that is being painted about him. And I can kind of corroborate that just because of texts and social media posts I've done about Garrett Foster in the past have gotten, trolled heavy, even just for me tweeting about it. So I can't imagine, the kind of abuse that she's faced. And every time this case gets back into the news cycle, as it's doing right now, that stuff comes up again for her. And so she, and so with Danny, this activist I do talk to, she lived with Danny for about a month after the shooting, because she was doxxed and she was facing death threats, and she felt unsafe at her own house. So she lived with Danny for a month. And then, on top of that, APD never even returned her house keys, which they seized off of Foster's body. And Danny talks about everything that she faced from working with the detective, Fugit, in that case, who was unhelpful and treated her terribly. And, just everything that the police have done in this case, it's just as egregious as Perry, right? All of the stuff that's coming out about Perry, where we're just like, oh my God, how much worse can this guy get? Like, how, you know what I mean? Like, what new low are we going to find out about this dude? Like, that's also APD, because APD, like the night that it happened, when Danny tried to cross the police line to get to Whitney, they attempted to arrest her that night, and Whitney was screaming, at them not to. APD was present the entire time during the shooting. They had been following the protesters in a white van for several blocks. They were there when the shooting happened. They didn't immediately respond, and they let Perry drive away. That is, you know what I mean? Like, they didn't apprehend him right there. He got taken in later. Like, they were there the entire time. And so, so that happened. And then, afterwards, there were organized memorial marches, like the next day that I attended. I was at those, and several more in the days that followed. And there is video, and I linked to it in the piece, where you can see an APD officer basically dumping Whitney out of her wheelchair onto a curb near the area where Garrett died. Like, just unimaginable bastards, like, just amazingly deplorable behavior. And then also police have destroyed Garrett's his vigil site, his memorial site several times repeatedly. So that's all stuff, in addition to the harassment that Whitney has had to go through. So just unimaginable stuff.
I'm just taking that in for a minute. It's just horrific. And, I'm thinking about the Austin Police Department. I'd be not surprised if we found out that there was like some lobbying of Abbott going on from that angle too. I mean, but clearly Tucker Carlson lobbied him live on Fox, but I'm sure that there's like conservative elements.
Perry's a vet, right?
Yeah.
But he's not a cop, right?
He's a former Army sergeant, but also Garrett Foster's a vet. Garrett Foster's
right. But I'm saying Perry's not a cop.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any.
Yeah, they're both vets. But the other connection there, I'll say, is Abbott has also, there were 19 cops during that summer who got accused of excessive force for the less lethal weapons and the abuse during those protests, right? And so they have been indicted. There has not been a trial date for those set, but Abbott has also talked about potentially pardoning the police officers. So,
and then, the other thing I want to introduce, it's just in the news in the last day or so that Abbott has said that he will sign a bill that's in the Texas legislature that would make it so that cops who injure or kill people with non-lethal weapons can't be prosecuted. Which plays into this whole agenda, which plays into a bigger agenda.
That's directly in response to the 19 cops here in Austin as well, that he has pledged to basically pardon if they are convicted. So that's a direct play off of what happened during the summer of 2020 here. Wild stuff. And in addition, I'll say, so another important part of the case that I also directly documented was, and Danny brings this up, that Garrett started open carrying in response to this prior incident where a separate motorist, not Daniel Perry, but about a month before the shooting, another motorist did the same thing, drove into the crowd of protesters and pulled a gun out and waved it around. Nobody was shot, but I was there for that. So I have a tweet thread about it that I also linked to, but basically this guy, he came in to the crowd, people surrounded the car because basically did the exact same thing, like drove in really fast. And so people were like, what the fuck? And like surrounded the car. And a protester I talked to at the time had like confronted the guy at his window, and he like pulled out a gun and aimed it at her and like other protesters in the crowd. And so basically APD like whisked that guy, like directed them into the parking garage, which was right there at APD. This was all in front of APD's headquarters. The guy got out, they commandeered his car. They like moved it, like they got into his car and like moved it. But then later we were watching and they let the guy go. But the whole thing had created like this standoff at the parking garage where like the police are handling this guy and protesters are all pissed and there's kind of a clash. So there's like a small clash that happens at the parking garage and they arrest 2 protesters. And so they let this guy, the prior guy go, they arrest 2 protesters. And it was that incident in particular that sort of prompted Garrett to start open carrying that AK. Because it was part of, again, it was just like this visual. He thought like it would be a deterrent for other people who might be meaning harm. And so that set off this kind of chain of events. And so, it's really important that like, and that wasn't even only, there was another incident where somebody had driven into the crowd, not necessarily waved a gun or anything, but there was several incidents where drivers had driven into the protesters that summer.
That had been happening all over 2020, and like many states were even passing laws to protect.
Yeah. Has Texas passed one of those laws where it's legal for people to drive over people blocking traffic? I know Oklahoma has.
Not yet. No.
Yeah, not yet. Not to my knowledge.
Don't give them time; they'll get to it.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
I'm kind of curious how you think if the pardon actually goes through, how is this going to embolden right wingers in Texas? Like, we'll see more in situations like this, incidents like this.
Yeah, I think that they're trying to legalize the killing of racial justice protesters. Basically, they're trying to, de facto legalize it. I mean, and Perry again is this good example of it, right? Because he had thought about this very scenario. He had written texts about it and written social media posts about it, about specifically killing protesters and claiming self-defense, right? And so I think that, if this pardon happens, other people who have those kinds of ideas in their head, other right wingers, far right activists who already have had those kinds of thoughts, are so much more emboldened to take action now because they have seen this play out and they know that they might be rescued by the government. That not only can they try to claim stand your ground, but that if they play their cards right, they might learn some lessons from this case. You know what I mean? About maybe not running a red light into the protester. They might be able to do it a little bit smarter.
Maybe not text everything you're thinking.
Right. Also that. But I definitely think that they would be much more emboldened. But again, I'm not entirely convinced the pardon is going to go through, in part because of the predatory stuff that got leaked. I think that that's kind of the biggest political conundrum for them, because they've been so heavy on this anti-groomer rhetoric that it really looks hypocritical for him to, you know what I mean? Like, this is not a young innocent person like Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Like so quote unquote innocent or whatever. Like, this is not fresh-faced young boy like crying. Like, this is Daniel Perry, a sexual predator, like a groomer. You know what I mean? It's not the same thing.
And it's basically a headache Abbott can avoid, and nothing will come of it. So there's no consequence. It's not like he's going to look like a fool for doing this to begin with or jumping into it. It's Texas, people in Uvalde, he won Uvalde County, so there's no consequences here in Texas. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one other thing I want to draw attention to about the unsealed texts that I really haven't seen get a lot of attention is that Perry also writes in there that he killed a homeless person. And there hasn't been very much coverage of this. I talk about it in the story a little bit because Danny brings it up, but there's two texts from March 20th where Perry says, I accidentally killed a homeless man, or something to that effect. That's not word for word. But then the second text is police already know and they let me go. So he sent two texts to that effect. And Danny talks about this because of how re-traumatizing it is for her as somebody who went through all of this, but was also, runs a shelter in Austin and has been focused on Austin's unhoused community forever. So it's not, it's dealing with all of this stuff around Perry that she's directly witnessed, but then also seeing stuff like that in his text where it's just everything she stands for, you know what I mean? Everything she's dedicated her life to. This guy is just totally, so about the text, I haven't seen any context for it. I don't know if there's been anything showing where that's from or where that happened or what police department he's referring to. So there's still a sort of mystery around that. But yeah, I just want to highlight it because there's probably a bigger story there. I'd like to try to dig into it. I don't know if any of your viewers might know more about this or anything like that. It's something I definitely want to look a little bit more into, right? But he texted about killing somebody. What? Yeah.
Has any other media brought that up? Even mainstream media, like Houston Chronicle, Austin, American Statesman?
I haven't seen it. There's a lot of stories about this now, so it's possible I could have missed it. I brought it up in my story to talk about, how traumatizing it is for folks like Danny and Whitney. but I haven't seen another story on it, and I think it's really well, you know what I mean? There's been a lot of a focus on the groomer stuff, which is important for us to highlight, like no doubt. But it's weird that this text where he literally talks about killing somebody is just kind of like.
Did that occur before Garrett Foster's death?
Yeah,
or-
it's from March 20 is when he texted it. So obviously the shooting happens in July. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild.
I do want to salute all, progressive media in Texas, like you being in Austin, and we've had you on talking about people defending Texas drag shows, and we talked about Texas's anti-abortion politics, I think last year after the Dobbs decision came out. And the one thing I want to bring up about progressive media is that, we recently saw where the Texas Observer almost went out of business. You were reprinted in the Texas Observer, and you have been, I think a lot of your stories that focus on Texas are. I'm wondering if you could just give us any thoughts on, what's happening in the Texas Observer. They were going to go out of business, and then there was a there was a big fund drive and like a lot of new subscribers. And then there was also some back and forth between the staff and the board. If you could just share anything with us on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a contributor to the Texas Observer for years, and the Observer has also been doing great original reporting around the Perry case, of where they did a story about specifically the predatory text messages that he had sent to the 16-year-old, and then also kind of doing a little bit of a history of the Parole Board and the politics of the Parole Board. And yeah, the Observer, has been around since 1954 and basically almost died in a very public way, but was rescued. It was kind of this miraculous, like 48 hours where the Texas Tribune broke the story that the board had called the top editor, Gabriel Arana, and said, like, we're going to lay everybody off. Like, you have to tell everybody that they're losing their jobs. So that story broke, right? And then all of a sudden, like, they did a counter proposal where they were like, the staff was like, give us a chance to fundraise and save ourselves, right? And so they did a GoFundMe and they raised like $400,000. I don't even know how much it is now. But last time I checked, it was like an insane amount of money, basically just like marshaled their resources, and all of this support poured in, not just in Texas, but like across the country. And there were several other pieces, like The Nation did a piece about them. And basically they brought it together, but the whole clash has been this long running clash between some of the people on the board and the editors at the Observer, where, some of the people there's been this antagonism between them. And so basically what it looks like now is that there's been a total victory for the staff of the Texas Observer, and the people on the board that had voted to end the Observer have been replaced on the board now, which is really great. And so they've raised all this money. They're getting a bunch of new subscribers to the magazine. So I think definitely the future is looking a little brighter for the Observer, which is just so crucial because, again, like I said, they republished my piece today. They did. So yeah, we've been doing a long running collaboration with them where, and we recently, so Kit O'Connell, the editor at Texas Observer, just had a great scoop about the agriculture department, Sid Miller's agriculture department, releasing a memo saying that employees have to dress according to their biological gender, like they have to dress in line with their biological gender. So Truthout reprinted that one. So we have this kind of collaboration between us that has been going on. But yeah, absolutely, Observer has been crucial.
Yeah. What was the motivation of those board members to like pull the plug? I mean, is there, I've seen in other media outlets where there's been, there's media real estate, which they could just like sell off. Is it something along those lines, or did they just tired of dealing with it?
My understanding, and again, like I'm a bit, on the outside here, but my understanding is that there was kind of a clash of vision where a lot of these board members were really like dedicated to this idea of the Observer from the past, kind of its heyday under like Molly Ivins and Ronnie Duger. There was this kind of like golden era, let's say, of the Observer. And I think that there was just a clash of visions for what the magazine should be, versus, what it is and what the staff. I think that there was a contention between, whether or not there should be like quicker hit commentary or like long form investigative journalism. And Observer has done some of the best long form investigative journalism there is. I mean, they win awards all the time. So that's kind of like a general understanding, but there's a lot more to that story. And yeah, there's a lot of great media pieces about, some of the stuff running up to what happened. But long story short, I think that they've really turned the entire ship around. And I think that the Observer will be around for a long time to come. That's
great. And folks, just lesson learned, support your progressive media, whether it's the Texas Observer, Truthout, or the Green and Red podcast.
Right. Yeah, totally.
That's it for my questions. Do you have anything else, Bob?
No, just, I know how hard it is to do this kind of stuff in Texas. So really appreciate all your efforts. And I know it's very painful and stressful and can be quite depressing at times. So thankfully you're out there doing it. And, we really do appreciate it. And anytime you want to talk, we're here. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate, like I said, what strengthens the progressive media information ecosystem is all of this collaboration, right? Yeah. Collaboration between journalists and pundits and commentators of all stripes. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys amplifying the story. I think, if enough people push on these narratives, it's very possible this pardon won't happen. And so we need to keep pushing because it's so, like I said, just unimaginably horrible.
Yeah.
Folks, you've been listening to Candice Bernd, senior editor and staff reporter at Truthout, talking about her new piece, Travis County DA Garza to defend Daniel Perry conviction at Parole Board. We've been talking about the case of Daniel Perry and his potential pardon by Greg Abbott, as well as the story of the person he killed, Garrett Foster, and his wife, Whitney Mitchell, and just talking about right-wing politics in general, in Texas, in general. And if you like what you're hearing, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you are watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe. And if you want to become a supporter of the Green and Red podcast, your local boutique lefty progressive media outlet, go to greenandredpodcast.org and hit that support button, or go to our Patreon at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. And Candice, really appreciate you coming on. Everyone else out there, misbehave, and we'll talk to you again soon.